All right. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. I had to push the couple of buttons, get the right buttons pressed and the volume up. I think we're good to go. We're live. Welcome back to the Bokeh Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz. It so happens to be Monday if you're watching live with us, and I hope you had a great weekend. I did. Actually, part of my photographer's edit team and myself, we had the opportunity to take a retreat. We went to Phoenix, Arizona, hung out in 90 plus degree weather, got to sit by the pool, do a food tour. It was actually really lovely. And so I had a nice week, and I hope you did as well. And I'm stoked to get into this week. And man, a really wonderful guest and an interesting conversation today as well. I'll introduce Alex here in just a second. For those of you that are live streaming with us today on Facebook or on YouTube, Facebook or YouTube /Bokeh Podcast, don't hesitate to join the conversation. If you want to throw in some thoughts, some ideas, ask a question, comment, don't be shy. It's meant to be a group conversation. So comment there in the, feel free to comment as much as you'd like, and I'll bring those comments in as I can and make that part of the discussion today. And then for those of you who are listening to this after the fact, as I always say, follow us on Instagram, Bokeh Podcast, Bokeh Podcast, and make sure that you keep up to date with the upcoming live stream schedule. We've been doing 1 to 2 a week. We're going to continue that, probably more consistently 2 a week. And so come join us occasionally for those live streams and become part of the conversation. And then last note before I introduce our guest for today, as I always promise I would do, I propped a little receipt there up on the screen. That's the receipt to Charity Water, donation to Charity Water that I made today before the podcast started. And I, again, just do this as a means to encourage everybody listening in to look for opportunities to give. It's amazing how a little bit of money can go a long way. And whether it's to local organizations or national, international organizations, look for those opportunities to give back today. We're pretty lucky. The fact that we have a phone or computer that we can watch or listen to this on even suggests that we're pretty lucky. So a few bucks can go a long way. Look for those opportunities to give back. All right. Well, enough of the introduction and monologue today. I want to introduce our brand new guest, Alex. And Alex, I'm going to try your last name one more time. Alex Oh, please pronounce it for me. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to pronounce it and then also figuring the accent in at the same time. I think that's what's throwing me off, but I appreciate you helping me out.
No problem.
And Alex has been so gracious he actually reached out a little while ago, and we talked about the idea of discussing his kind of foray into photographing weddings for budget-conscious brides and grooms. And I think this is a really interesting topic that we're going to get into in quite a bit of detail today. I've talked about it a little bit before on the podcast, but Alex, thanks for being willing to come join the conversation in the community. I'm pretty stoked about this.
No, I mean, I think it's as I was saying to you before we came on air, I find your podcasts such a great source of information. Because like you say, I know you're trying to keep it practical, but I find literally every single one I listen to, you pick up something. Even if it's something like you go, I could never think of doing that kind of marketing. It wouldn't suit me. But you just look at how, and also I find it inspiring when you have somebody on. I can't remember she was a Canadian, she was a First Nation woman from Canada. Mm-hmm. And she was just like, I started 2 years ago and now I've got this really thriving business. And she sort of basically started it through the COVID pandemic, if I remember rightly.
Absolutely.
People with motivation, and a bit of luck and everything, it's surprising what people can do,
It's so true. Yeah, it's really true. And you and I talked about this before we went live today. There's a tendency in our industry, and I've talked about this on the podcast before. There's a tendency in our industry to kind of highlight a small select number of photographers who sure may have found great success, talented as photographers, maybe talented as speakers, and that's fine. There's definitely benefit there. But the unfortunate reality of that is that we hear from the same people all the time. I love this podcast for multiple reasons, one of which is that we get to highlight photographers from all over who in many cases don't get that stage, literally or figuratively. And there's opportunity to learn from somebody, as you pointed out, whether they've only been in business for a couple of years or they've been in business for 20 years, or in your case, having even more experience than that as a photographer. And I'm going to get to that here in just a second. I'm actually quite fascinated by this. But I think I appreciate the kind words, and it certainly is a reflection of our goal here at the podcast, which is to bring practical, actionable information, even if it's a small bit of simple information that a photographer can go apply to their business immediately. I'm super stoked to hear that that's happening. So I appreciate the kind words, truly.
Okay, no problem.
So, and I want to kind of segue into your background as a photographer, because while we're going to be talking about kind of a new business venture for you today, and we'll get more context to that here in just a second, you have quite a bit of experience as a photographer. I'm going to actually pull up your website here, and for everybody listening in, or excuse me, viewing live, and let me, again, pushing the wrong buttons today here. There we go. Got it. For anybody listening or watching live, you can see this on screen, AlexMacNaughton.com. And Alex, I'm just kind of stunned because I never had this kind of technical expertise as a photographer and journalistic capability as a photographer that I see in your work here. And just clicking over to your portfolio, such a wide variety of work. I mean, we've got Owen Wilson, portrait of Owen Wilson pops up on screen right next to the, a stunning image of a journalistic image here that looks like, I don't know, did you shoot this with film here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Film.
I mean, just the wide range of work is just stunning to me. So I'd love for you to give some context to this because this is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a photographer, I think this is 30 years now.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I was basically in a factory job. I was working in I don't want to say dead end because lots of people work in factories, but I was in a job working in a factory. But I had an interest in photography, and I went to an exhibition by a very famous British newspaper photographer called Don McCullum.
Okay.
And that sort of inspired me to become a newspaper photographer.
Mm.
And I did a 3-month photography course at a college, and that was all the money I had, so I couldn't do any longer. And I basically had lost my job. So it's one of these things.
Yep.
And I wasn't living in London at the time. I was living in a small town about an hour out of London, where nothing ever happened. It's like nothing ever happened there. And but by chance they were building a new motorway, like freeway, around that town, and it was quite historic. And it was like one of the first very big environmental protests. This is 30 years ago. And I went up photographing that because I had nothing else to do. Interesting.
Is that what that picture on the homepage is from?
The first picture. Yeah. No, that was from, it's sort of connected actually, because that was a protest because the government changed the law about the right to protest in the UK. So certain things which had been legal became illegal and stuff. And this was actually a protest against it. So it was all sort of connected in. There was a sort of 3-4 year period when there was a lot of stuff going on about it. And I photographed it. It became a big story. And that meant I sort of got pictures published in national newspapers in the UK. And that's how I really started.
So did it lead from journalism to, I'm still trying to make the connection between your obviously super talented journalistic work to a portrait of Owen Wilson? Like, how do you go from that to that? What's the story there?
Oh, well, actually, the portrait of Owen Wilson was actually a film still. I was working on a film. Woody Harrelson was making a film in the UK. And I was the on-set photographer for the film.
Okay.
And it was quite a small, well, it was a sort of biggish film, but Woody Harrelson was calling in a lot of favors. So I didn't know. Owen Wilson is a good friend of his, so he was appearing in the film, but playing himself, but basically playing his sort of character a bit from that, what's the film where he's playing a model, male model? Anyway. So he was sort of playing himself, camping it up as himself.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it was all sort of on the hoof. So in some ways, it sort of stemmed back from when I was a newspaper photographer. It wasn't I mean, actually, that was one of the few setup shots I managed to do because of the way the film was being shot. Because it was quite a weird film because it was actually shot all in one take and then broadcast live at the same time. So it was a bit complicated.
Well, there's such we have, you and I were talking about this before we got started today. We're digging into a big topic today because we're not just talking about the idea of photographing, shall we say, just for the sake of simplicity, budget weddings or cost conscious weddings, but we're also talking about the business model behind that. So we have a lot to talk about. I just wanted to at least give our listeners a little bit of context. So you would say probably your biggest, or the largest amount of experience that you have as a photographer is in journalism. And then have you kind of dabbled in portrait and wedding work on the side as well along the way?
Well, I did. Yeah, I mean, I started off as a newspaper photographer, but then, and then I did that for really a lot for 10 years or so. But then I started doing a lot of corporate photography as well. And I also did, how many was it? Also published 4 books, or got commissioned to do 4 books as well.
Okay. What type of books?
So they're on the website. I did 3 of them were about street art, things like Banksy.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it was that sort of thing.
Okay.
And then I did one about people with tattoos.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it was like, especially the first couple of books I did about street art. I mean, I think in total I've sold like 60,000 books.
Goodness, wow. Yeah. Well, again,
I mean, they were commissioned, so they were like, it was a commission. It wasn't like I was going out to a market store with piles of books. But
no, well, but no need to downplay that though. That's actually really impressive, and it's not commonplace for photographers. I mean, occasionally a photographer will put a book out there, and it may sell a few copies, but that's actually really interesting. And again, why I said that I was kind of fascinated by your background, because when I first saw your email and I started looking at your site, I was trying to kind of make sense of it. Like here you've got all this experience as a photographer and just extremely talented. For anybody curious, again, make sure that you go to Alex's website. I'll pop it up here on screen. Alex MacNaughton.com. I'm going to pronounce that correctly. AlexMacNaughton.com. But you can go check out his portfolio there. But you said that you were interested in getting into wedding photography, and not just wedding photography. I mean, it seems like the typical track, and I'm guilty as charged. The typical track is you get in, you start at kind of a lower end price point, and then you gradually work your way up to charging, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and even more. And that's fine, except the reality, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, maybe you're aware of this, Alex, but at least here in the US market, if you go to weddingreport.com, Wedding Report says between 70 and 80% of weddings photographed in the US are photographed for $2,000 and below. And I have a feeling that that data includes probably, or is figuring in some weddings that were literally free. A friend or family member photographed the wedding. So while all of these photographers are just going to like crazy, going to these high-end weddings, mid to high-end weddings, the actual larger percentage of the marketplace is on the low end. And there's a massive business opportunity. And there have been very few photographers or companies that have come along and actually tried to, at scale, serve that segment of the marketplace. And so I'm curious what drew you to that segment of the marketplace versus trying to go higher, and especially with all your experience.
Well, I mean, the thing is, 3 years ago, I moved to Nairobi in Kenya. And I don't want to go too much into the detail of it, but, for a number of reasons, it hasn't worked out the way I hoped. And because of COVID and things like that, a lot of sort of quite large clients I had have all disappeared. And I'm having to move back to the UK.
Okay.
So the problem with things like the stuff I was doing, if you're not there, they forget about you.
Well, so yeah, that's kind of business in general, but yeah, that makes sense.
So newspaper work looks very glamorous, but it's terrible. I mean, the pay is terrible. I mean, and it's become worse. I mean,
Sure.
going back like, for example, going back, I'm thinking, like nearly 25 years ago, people are being paid half of what I was being paid. And I mean, not taking inflation into account,
Wow.
literally half.
Wow.
And then and also not being paid expenses. So they won't be paid travel. So if they're in London, they're expected to just get on the underground, the tube trains to go to jobs.
Wow.
And it's sort of like, and one of the big differences between now and 20 years ago, we were still we were just going digital. But we were still, my last film camera lasted me like 10 years and it still works now.
Of course, yeah.
Digital cameras now, they get replaced or the camera manufacturers are at least trying to make you replace them every 2 or 3 years. They're going, well, that camera you bought a year ago is rubbish. You've got to get this one.
Right.
So, yeah, and the reason about sort of wanting to go for the lower end, it's not like I don't want to do high-end weddings, but also it's partly from listening to your podcasts. Every time you get somebody on, some of them are quite highly paid photographers, which I don't have a problem with, but you always say to them, but 80% of the market is this.
It's true.
And it's true. And the thing is, and also I don't think from my research in the UK market is quite as buoyant as the US, because the sort of prices, even sort of quite high end or more expensive side, doesn't seem to match up to what people in the US are able to charge.
I noticed that when I was doing a bit of research. Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, there are some. I've come across 1 or 2 people who are charging, but maybe $6,000 for a wedding, but that seems quite rare. And it's sort of, and also sort of like, I actually like being busy. I'm probably weird. I would prefer to do, 40 weddings at $1,000 than 20 at 2. Because I just think I prefer, and also it's sort of like the more weddings you do, the more referrals you're going to generate. Because I'm sure most photographers, once they get established, are getting work through referrals more than anything else.
Yeah, that's true. I would say, especially from my experience photographing, I mentioned this to you before we started today, but my first wedding I shot for $350. And I started in film actually as well. So I 35 millimeter and then also shot medium format, but $350. And then when we first start to put together packages, I think the packages ranged, I might even have a picture of it somewhere, from like $600 to $1,200. This is back in 2001, 2002, somewhere in that realm. And then kind of slowly worked our way up from there. But you're right. I think at that price point, referrals, not so much from wedding coordinators at that point, referrals from people in the same income bracket, friends, family, that's probably more where the referrals are going to come from. And we'll talk more about this when we get to the marketing portion of our conversation. But I would also say that there's opportunity, unlike 2001, 2002, there's a lot more opportunity right now, I think, with Google ads and Facebook ads, Instagram ads for that particular segment of the market. I think I know that we found a lot of success as well in bridal shows, where I could go to a bridal show and put up in a booth and some really nice pictures that stood out in comparison to some of the other photographers. And I could see that opportunity with you, by the way. But we actually, at the time in the Chattanooga market, 2001, 2002, it was still very traditional in that everything was in color. There was a lot of posed work. A lot of stuff was being shot in medium format. And I was shooting 35 millimeter, kind of a journalistic style. So I'd say 70% or so of the wedding booth that we put together for this bridal show was in black and white. And we did it on like a textured art paper and in smaller format. And so immediately we stood out from everybody around us because the work looked different. And I could see you being able to do that with your journalistic approach. But then simultaneously, we were charging a price point that at that point kind of undercut a lot of the established competition. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how the market works, right? But we had a lot of opportunity to be able to book quite a few weddings through that bridal show as a result. But I'm getting ahead of myself because we're gonna talk about marketing here in just a little bit. There's so much to cover. But actually, Dawn just commented on Facebook, and this sets me up for the question that I have for you, Alex. She said, that is definitely the truth. However, you work so much harder to make money at it because the client is strictly looking at cost and want to maximize or maximum service for the least amount. And Don makes a good point here and kind of leads me to the question, Alex, which is, yes, 80%, 70-80% of the market is in that price range. So there's a lot of opportunity. The big caveat to the conversation is that because they're paying you less and you're also having to work more in order to make whatever your financial goals are for the year. I'm curious if you've kind of thought about what it will take in order to reach those financial goals. And of course, you don't have to go into those, but and be able to reach those financial goals, but not get burnt out at the same time. Have you kind of thought through that process a bit?
Maybe in a year or two, I'll be completely wrong. But I mean, to me, there's another one of your speakers fairly recently was sort of saying, the thing is, if you sort of take into account the wedding takes you 12 hours to do, on the ground, and you're working a 40-hour week like normal people do, you should be able to turn a wedding around in a week. I've seen some people going, I deliver the pictures in 16 weeks. And I just sort of think they could be divorced in that time.
Yeah, so true.
16 weeks. I mean, that's partly coming from my background where we can edit 1,000 pictures in a coffee shop in an hour. I mean, I'm not saying that's to the same standard as you would want to do a wedding, but it is possible. So,
well, I think you make an interesting point, and we'll get to this, but you're right that especially when it comes to workflow, I think photographers spend way too much time working. Wedding photographers I'll speak to specifically because I shot weddings more so than I did portrait work. I think portrait photographers, I could even make a similar argument for, but whereas, a wedding photographer might argue that they have to work 40, 50 hours a week in order to make things happen. I would actually argue that it probably takes no more than 20 hours a week if you're intentional about the workflow. You take advantage of tools, which we'll discuss a little bit later, that enable us to automate a lot of our workflow, that enable us to simplify a lot of our workflow. If we're also intentional about the way that we're managing time, maybe working in chunks of time instead of just kind of having a computer open all the time and on our phone all the time, then naturally we're going to waste time and we're going to work a lot less efficiently. I think the intention behind the workflow makes a massive difference, right? So we're going to talk about that. And I'll go ahead and say this at the outset for everybody listening in. This may go a little bit longer today as far as our normal episodes are about an hour long. We may go a little over that. We're also trying to tackle a topic that really deserves probably 5 or 6 hours if we're going to actually cover it in detail. But I'm going to try to at least lay down some basic principles for each of the primary talking points. I'll share some ideas, some suggestions. And of course, Alex has brought questions to the conversation. And then for those of you that are listening or watching live, don't hesitate to pop in questions along the way as well. And we'll try to make all this. We're going to try to do everything today at once. We'll try to make it happen. So let's actually get first into the brand position, Alex. And this is interesting. By the way, Alex is one of the most prepared guests that I've ever had on the show. I don't think I've ever, in over 500, and getting close to 600 episodes now, I don't think I've ever had a photographer send me a spreadsheet of information prior to the episode. So major props to Alex for being super prepared here. But I say that laughing, but it's also a really, truly a great trait, because one of the things that photographers don't do, and we talk a lot about brand position here on the show, and it's important that if you're going to get into this realm that you're super clear about your brand position, that a lot of photographers haven't done thorough research of their marketplace. And the spreadsheet that Alex sent to me was a breakdown of cost or of what photographers are charging in his marketplace and what those averaged out to. You've actually taken time to do this, Alex. Have you also looked at kind of how they're positioning themselves, marketing themselves, how they're differentiating themselves from other photographers in their marketing message?
I don't think they are.
Okay.
Most of them, I think very, very few of them had. I didn't feel like many of them had a really clear message. I mean, you go on about having a clear, I mean, it's not even really a sentence long message at the top of your website, you know, above the fold. And I didn't feel many people had that. I mean, I think a lot of people had fallen into that thing where you go, they had the same website, which has been there for 15 years.
Yep. I did see some of that.
And I felt that, also felt like, to me, there was an awful lot of scrolling, which I've noticed with a lot of people, where you're just like scrolling and scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this might be a terrible thing to say. I sort of see myself on the same level as like a carpenter or a plumber. I've just got a skill which I'm selling people. And what people want to know is, do you have the qualification? Can you do the job? Are you available? And how much are you going to cost?
Yeah.
The rest of it is sort of like, so what? Because it's a bit sort of like, I mean, I find it quite, I mean, some people are like, you know, sometimes it's like really hard. I mean, people label up pricing differently on their website, which I find really odd. Some people say investment, which I don't get. I mean, I feel it's like somebody once wrote an article saying, if you call it investment as opposed to price, you'll get 20% more interest.
Right.
And then you get other people who call it packages, but then not everyone calls it the same. And you can't actually, sometimes it's a struggle, even when people are listing their price, to find their price. And it just, I mean, to me, it's just like, you want these things just at the top of the website, and they never move. You know what I mean? They're not, when you scroll, they don't disappear.
100%.
You're there.
I'm in full.
It's sort of like, and then it's like, are you available for the day? Because you know, you've been a wedding photographer. Did anyone ever say to you, we've got everything booked, but you can't do our date, so we're going to rebook everything so we can have you? You know?
It can happen. It can happen for sure. But yeah, we want to make it easy for them to know whether or not you're available for sure. I mean, that's
most people book the venue and then fit everything around the venue. They're not sort of going, we've got everything booked, the photographer can't do it, so we're going to cancel everything and wait for our photographer.
Yeah, certainly not to that extent. Yeah. No. You make some really interesting points here, but I think I'm kind of hearing and seeing this word in my mind, practicality. And honestly, I think you highlight a significant problem. We've talked about it here on the podcast quite a bit as well. The lack of practicality that photographers, with which photographers approach the design of their website. It's a lot of pretty and a lot of fluff, and in many ways kind of designed for other photographers versus the clients who are just coming there to learn what services are offered, how they differ, what they cost, and is the photographer available. And you highlighted that beautifully. And that's, I think, of course, there are also some cultural differences to consider, but I think at the end of the day, while sure, some brides may want a little bit of a relationship with their photographer, and certainly feeling more comfortable with their photographer goes a really long way. I had great relationships with my clients, and it paid off in the pictures that we were able to get. So I don't want to minimize that. But when we're considering the average individual, the amount of time that they're going to spend on a website, we just talked about this in a recent episode, something like 55 seconds on a page. And photographers are filling it with paragraphs of information. You're absolutely right, Alex, that you're having to, even in the research that I was doing prior to our conversation, you're literally having to like scroll through and kind of squint your eyes and look through all this text in order to find that one line that's talking about the actual price on the pricing page. And that's just ridiculous. There's no reason for that. So I would fully agree with you that practicality and simplicity should be the focus. And I think you could absolutely do that. And that would actually even encourage people, if they know they're coming to you because there's an opportunity to find affordable wedding photography. That may be the draw, because somebody with a budget, for example, when I got married, my parents paid $600 for the wedding photographer. And that was a lot of money for them. We didn't make a lot of money. And so if somebody's going to a photographer, they already know ahead of time, this person is a wedding photographer who is focused on the budget market, and they offer a service at a price point that I can afford. They're already excited about that. They're taken by your images. They see you're available, and it doesn't take them more than 60, 90 seconds to find that information out because you've designed your website so simply. It's going to be an almost immediate conversion, an easy conversion, certainly. in that context. So, but we're kind of jumping around. I want to come back to, so you talked about the messaging. When we talk about brand position, because that's where I want to start, you know that you want to serve the budget market. And, again, it could be a conversation, a podcast episode in and of itself, as long as you're comfortable with the amount of money that you can make shooting 40, 50 weddings at around a price point of, say, $1,000 or so. Then that's good. I just want to make sure that's always an important conversation for photographers to, and I'll say this to everybody listening in and watching, make sure that when you're going to choose your brand position and the market that you're going to serve, that you are able to do so with both the financial consideration and the time consideration. It's always the two kind of primary components of that conversation. I know I want to make X amount a year in order to pay the bills and put some money away. And then I also know that I'm only willing to work X amount of time in a week or in a month or in a year in order to make that amount of money. So those are kind of my two primary variables that I'm looking at. And as long as you've taken the time to consider that, Alex, then that's great. And I want to keep going with the conversation. When you actually we get to this brand position conversation, differentiating yourself from other photographers, you're in the Newbury area, Hampshire, Berkshire, and I was looking through the list of photographers that you sent to me, and you're absolutely right. The messaging either does not exist, there's no brand position, or it's stuff like light, classic, romantic. I'm literally reading here what I took notes on: real moments, not posed, award-winning, natural and relaxed, creative, documentary and creative. It's the feelings and the memories they trigger, capture beautiful wedding stories. These are all just kind of cute and trite phrases that, again, they seem to be almost serving the photographer more than they do the client, because it doesn't really communicate what's being offered. Creative is such a vague word, right? Like, it can mean so many different things to so many people. There's really not a term of value. And what we talk about here on the podcast when it comes to brand position is be practical, using words that actually, that your potential client would use in their daily vocabulary, in their language. And if you say, for example, affordable wedding photography for Newbury couples, there's nothing to be missed there. The value proposition is there. You're calling out the target market that you're speaking to or that you want to serve. It can literally be as simple and as practical as that. And to your point about scrolling, they don't need to scroll to find that. That can be right there along with a beautiful image that has some white space that makes available the space for that text. And keep it simple. I did a brief search, and I'm going to recommend a tool for you and for everybody listening in. There is a tool called Keywords Everywhere. And we'll link to this in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com for anybody who's listening to the audio version of this. Maybe you're in your car right now. You can't stop to look this up. But keywordseverywhere.com is a really great tool. It's a plugin. It has a plugin for Firefox and for Chrome. I personally use Chrome. And it allows you, when you do Google search, not only do you see the results from that Google search, but it gives you alternative suggestions as well as to other phrases that people might be searching along with that. I looked at affordable, I looked at budget, and affordable and budget, you could use those as keywords on the homepage of your site and other places in your site for the sake of SEO. But affordable wedding photography for Newbury couples or budget wedding photography for Newbury couples, I would suggest one of those phrases as kind of your position statement. Do a little bit of research for yourself as well with Keywords Everywhere and comparable tools. But that communicates the value proposition very distinctly. Literally no one else in your market is saying anything about budget. The price, some of their prices are lower, but they're not saying anything about budget. They're not owning that space. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I prefer sort of affordable. Budget sounds cheap.
A little too harsh.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, the problem is actually what I thought was affordable. Some people are just charging ridiculously low prices. You know what I mean? And you just go, I can't compete with that.
Yeah, I think starting, there was one photographer who, it was for 2 hours, they were charging, was it $500? And then they had a half day for $900, and then a full day coverage was starting like $12 or something like that.
I think there was one even cheaper than that. I think the first one was like £250, which is like $300. Yeah, so, I can't remember. But I mean, the thing is, it's sort of, I mean, you can't compete against people who are sort of charging. It's more like I want to offer, good photography at a good price, as opposed to being just completely competing on price, because you can't win on that market. I mean, I've got a sort of idea, and I've got an idea in mind of the sort of price level I want to be at. And I understand what you're saying. You've got to try and work out how much that would bring you in if you're doing 40 weddings, let's say, which might be a reasonable number.
Yeah, with costs of business, taxes, and there's quite a bit that goes. Well, I say quite a bit. The primary expenses, of course, in this case, if you're doing a basic package, would be the cost of editing, whether that's your time you're doing that, or you're outsourcing that, or you're paying for a subscription for some software, or even just using Lightroom's built-in automated corrections. You've got the cost of editing, cost of any goods if you're going to include an album or something comparable in that. And then, of course, taxes associated with it, and then kind of the larger, bigger picture, any cost of software to run your business. But once you figure that in, if you're able to make the margin that you need to, charging what you said, what was the range that you were shooting for?
Probably about, I think in dollars, it'd be about 1,100. Okay,
shooting 40 to 50 weddings a year. As long as that's something that's feasible, then there's a massive opportunity. It's a whole. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going. The thing is, I'm a single guy. I've got no commitments.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's not like I got. Yeah, I mean, I will. Yeah, I mean, it's. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but I'm sort of looking back to. A lot of people don't make anywhere near that kind of money.
It's very, very true, which is, again, why there's an opportunity to serve that market as well. It's just a question of goals. Different people have different goals. And I think the idea of making six figures or even more potentially is appealing. It sounds nice. When you're scrolling through Instagram and you see fancy cars and homes and all this other, that people like the idea of it. But practically speaking, what are the actual financial goals at the end of the day? And if being able to serve this market in the way that you're describing enables you to reach your goals, and that's really all that matters. The only thing that I would add to that, and again, it's a whole separate conversation, but if you get to a point in a year or 2 years or 5 years where you're like, you know what, first of all, I've built up a business and it's going really well, tons of opportunity, I even have to turn business away, but I'm also getting a little bit tired. There would be opportunity to hire either second photographers, contract photographers, or even bring in a small staff, 2 or 3 people that could actually photograph for you. It could be college students for that matter. You put together a little training program, bring them in, they shoot it for $300-$400, and maybe you make $400 or $500 off the top. There's different ways that you can go about this model. I just think there's so much opportunity there. I think the apprehension that a lot of photographers have is very simply too little for too much time. They're not thinking about how to scale it. And I think where the real opportunity lies is scale, potentially down the road. So again, a separate conversation. I just want to kind of throw that out there for you and everybody listening in.
I mean, also I wasn't planning. The only extra I was going to give the couples was going to be, one of these like branded USB sticks.
Okay, so super simple. Okay.
And then I was going to be using something, probably PicTime. Is it PicTime?
Uh-huh.
And then basically, letting them make their own album, pushing it onto the client rather than you having to try and handle that yourself. Because to me, it looks like if you were doing albums for your clients, I can imagine that must be a massive drain on your time.
It's actually a really great point. Yeah. We used to work with, and I know PicTime has gotten to the space. I'm so impressed with their platform, and the design of their platform is beautiful. Just one of the most beautiful out there. And for anybody who's listening and who doesn't know, in fact, I'll just pop this up on screen really quick. If you go to PicTime.com, you can see what we're talking about here. It's just a stunning platform. What I was getting to, Alex, though, is one of the things that they've done, which I'm surprised actually more platforms haven't done this, more galleries haven't done this, is that they've begun to build in, as you can see here at the top of the page, marketing automation, where they'll actually help you do the marketing. And when I was shooting actively, I worked with a company, no longer exists, but called Pictage. And much like you, I didn't have a lot of interest in kind of the post process. After we photographed the wedding, we were making the money that we wanted to with the wedding itself and didn't want to spend a whole lot of time in sales after the fact. Pictage was brilliant because I could shoot the wedding. we could edit the images and upload them into Pictage. And from that point, Pictage took over. Clients came to purchase product if they wanted it, prints. We could offer albums through them if we wanted to. And then they also offered automated marketing emails. Like if you want to run a sale or something like that, they took care of that for you.
Yeah.
And this is what we were talking about earlier for everybody listening in too. If you don't have a workflow that's leveraging tools like this that enable you to automate a lot of this process, then yeah, of course you're going to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. But if you're leveraging something like this and you're intentional about it, you can have a 15, 20 hour work week as a wedding photographer, shooting a wedding a weekend, plugging it into your workflow, and your hands off. And it can be super simple like that. So I think that's interesting. It's good to note when I'm thinking about cost. But I want to keep the conversation going though too. So brand position, affordable wedding photography for Newbury couples. Or if you wanted to highlight a different market, you could potentially do that. That's what I would suggest, just very simply from a brand position statement. Yep. And that, of course, we already know based on our discussion that that's going to literally drive your business model. That is what you're attempting to do, is to offer affordable wedding photography. Your work, there's no question about the quality of your work, but affordable wedding photography to this particular market segment in that locale. And people land on your site, they're going to immediately know that because that position statement will be there at the top of the page. And I think that's great. Pricing, just figuring in, I mean, you've already thought about the pricing and minimal cost associated with that. And honestly, I don't know if you have a particular intention with that USB stick. I would even nix that USB stick. That's additional cost. Most people are looking, and maybe it's a cultural thing, but at least here in the US, most people are looking at the images in a gallery anyway. The USB stick may get lost, and I don't know if there's a ton of benefit or additional value there. Did you have some particular idea behind that?
It was just most people seem to offer it. It just seems to be the bare, most people that's sort of there. Most of them sort of go, there's an online gallery and a customized USB stick, and you're talking, I've looked up the cost, you're talking like $30 to get one. Okay. For a wedding. It's not huge. It's not a huge expense. It just feels like you're giving them, there's something for them.
Got it.
But most of it I want to drive through like pick time. Mm-hmm. So you're driving it. And also the thing is, a friend of mine, actually it's my ex-partner, said to me that every wedding she's gone to, people have taken tons of pictures, but they never get to see them or are never able to get copies of the photos. So I was thinking of also offering a service of emailing all the guests at a wedding, the gallery, saying that you can do that for the bride and groom. You should say, you supply me with the list and I can email out the gallery to everyone. Mm-hmm. So then you can get guests, hopefully, buying a picture of themselves.
For sure. Well, and I think with the marketing tools that PicTime has built in, you may even be able to do something like that. I think that would be really good. Again, just to kind of keep the conversation moving, I think as far as and we'll come back to CRM here in just a second. You already talked about PicTime. They're going to help with the marketing side of things. CRM and workflow associated with that, we'll touch on in just a second. But we have a brand position. It's pretty clear. You've got work, I'm sure, that you can already upload. I would, just a little side note, a suggestion, I would actually highlight your journalistic work, because in this day and age, compared to when I started 20 years ago, experience mattered. People want to know how long have you been shooting, and you talked about the awards that you won, and that's just not a thing anymore. At least, and maybe it's a little bit different in the market that you're in. Here, you're not leading with that. People are just curious to see your work, price point, availability, and that's kind of where the conversation goes. So anyway, all that to say, if you're leading with a brand position statement, it's clear, it's upfront, I would do that on a website that's also super clean. And, I'm sorry, what I was saying was lead with your journalistic work. I think that will speak for itself. You won't have to kind of prop up your experience. Putting that journalistic work on a really clean and simple website the way that you described, I would suggest a WordPress platform. Have you used WordPress in the past?
No.
So there's a company that I'll recommend. It was started by a guy who I worked with actually for quite some time, and a friend of mine, Ross Tanner. It's called Flow Themes, FLO themes.com. And it is a system built on WordPress. So it's kind of plug and play. They've got templates available, but you're running on WordPress. And WordPress is notoriously really good for SEO. And the tools that I'm going to recommend for SEO a little bit later also can tie in there. But I would suggest something like Flow Themes, because I personally also want to kind of minimize the noise and the confusion and the distractions of so many different things going on the screen. And their style of design for their themes is just beautiful. And again, it's built on WordPress, which I'll go ahead and say now just leads me to conversation. First of all, I'm talking about all these different things. I'm going to pull this up really quick and show everybody who might be listening and watching. And I can also show you Alex Flow Themes here on the site, Creative Custom Photography website on WordPress. No code knowledge required. Everything is intuitive, drag and drop. And you can actually scroll down and see examples of how simple it is to use their system. Lots of white space, just beautiful, beautiful design. And of course, the cool thing is you can take away from they offer templates which you can then customize. So anything that you don't want on screen, you can always take away and keep it as simple as you want. But I think it's a really great starting place because it is so minimalist in nature. Just a beautiful, beautiful design. So Flow Themes. And by the way, nobody is paying me to talk about their company today. This is just what came to mind because I want simplicity and minimalism and beautiful design. Flow Themes is that, and it's built on WordPress. And I've just had such incredible experience with WordPress when it comes to SEO. And so that's what I would recommend. Did you already have plans in place as far as the website goes?
Not really. I'd looked at all the usual suspects like Squarespace and things like that. I hadn't made a decision about.
Yeah, Squarespace is fine. Talk about user friendliness, and they do have templates that are pretty clean. When it comes to customization, it can start to get a little bit difficult. You can customize only to a point, and then you have to start to get a developer involved. I have a Squarespace site myself, just for my nathanholritz.com, my basic website, kind of landing page. And it's super user friendly, but yeah, customization becomes a little difficult, and they have a little bit of SEO tools built in, but not near what you can get with WordPress and plugins for WordPress. So okay. I would suggest moving that direction. Kind of best of both worlds, and Flow Themes is the one that I would suggest. And the reason I said WordPress, and forgive me, let me grab a drink of water here really quick. Dry throat today for some reason. The reason I was saying WordPress is because of the SEO tool that we've been using actually over at Photographer's Edit. We'll be using with a new company we're launching soon called Yoast, Yoast. Have you heard of Yoast before?
No.
Okay, let me.
I have to say SEO is a mystery.
Oh, and to be clear, I'm not an expert. In fact, I'm going to recommend a few episodes here in just a second, but I wanted to mention Yoast here real quick. So everybody sees Flow Themes there on site, but I'll jump over here to Yoast, and it's yoast.com. And for anybody who is using WordPress in particular, they may have plugins available for other platforms, but yoast.com has been just wonderful for us over at WordPress. And we have the front end of the Photographer's Edit, photographersedit.com website is built on WordPress. We're going to be doing the same thing with the new brand that we're launching soon. And the cool thing about that is it gives us a lot of control over that process of maximizing SEO. And what happens is when you plug in Yoast to WordPress, Yoast will begin to make suggestions and even almost requirements. It'll throw red flags if you're not doing what you should be when it comes to SEO. It'll essentially handhold you through the process of making sure that each page that you create is super SEO friendly. And so Yoast, I'm going to recommend highly when it comes to SEO. It's a really, really powerful tool. And they've got a free version. So, and then I think the paid version, I don't know what it amounts to, like 10 or 15 bucks a month or something like that. It's minimal cost and just biggest bang for the buck when it comes to SEO and any kind of a plugin for WordPress.
Right.
The other thing that I'll, mention as well, super important, it may seem to go without saying, but photographers listening in, and also for you, Alex, if you haven't thought about this, make sure for the sake of SEO that you are adding alt text to images. WordPress, the way that WordPress works is when you upload images, it'll give you the option to be able to tag those images and to add the alt text in there. And Google is certainly going to look at the alternative text that you associate with images, and that will help with SEO. That's super important. And I think Yoast even has a tool or reminder probably built into that to help you with that too. But nonetheless, super important. H1 and H2 tags using the keywords that you want to rank for. So when you talk about affordable wedding photography, Newbury, for example, making sure that you're building that into the H1 and H2 tags. And you can learn more about all of this in the podcast episodes I'm going to share in just a second, but just a few touch points. I already mentioned Yoast. I'm just looking at my notes here. Yoast for WordPress, and then keywords everywhere that I mentioned earlier as well, just as a way to search alternative phrases or some of the additional phrases, top 3, 4, 5 additional phrases that are popular in searches. You can use keywords everywhere to help you in searching for that. And then for everybody listening in, there are 3 different episodes that we've had on, or that we put on, I think in the last year and a half or so, Alex. Episode 432, SEO for Photographers with Corey Potter and Dylan Howell. And then episode 511, UX and SEO for Higher Website Conversions with Julia Bochese. And then episode 535, just recently, a fresh approach on SEO tactics with Fusa Rice. And we'll link to those in the show notes when we publish the audio version of this episode. We'll link to those in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com for everybody listening in. But those couple of bullet points that I threw out there, Alex, is just from personal experience and chatting with our head of digital marketing, some of the key ideas. But it also super basic. Those 3 episodes will give you a head start. Right. And I know that Fusa Rice offers consulting services. I think Julia does as well. I'm not sure if Corey is actively right now, but these are resources that you could also go to from a professional, not me, yeah. From a professional that could actually help you set up SEO. But I'm telling you, Yoast and WordPress, those 2 things just from the get-go, you'll be kind of miles ahead, just to give you a head start.
That sounds pretty important.
For sure. And
yeah, I mean,
go ahead, please.
No, I just mean, I remember setting up my first website years ago, which I sort of did myself. And it was really easy to get ranked on Google back then. You know, you just had to basically put London it didn't seem, now it just seems so complicated. It just seems, you know what I mean? It's the days of it being relatively straightforward. And even from my brief sort of research into it, it just seems to be changing almost on a weekly basis. You know, it just seems
what
to be crazy.
What Google is putting emphasis on is definitely changing, and yeah, I guess that's kind of an ongoing thing, as you pointed out. But for a head start, Yoast will be really good because it's kind of plug and play. So once you plug that into WordPress, on each page, it literally tells you, hey, you need to do this, 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 and this is too short, and you need to add more text here. Or you need to highlight these keywords here and there. It's really, really helpful, especially for an amateur like me. Yeah, it's and you know we know it's important, and there are definitely professionals that I mentioned that we can go to for help. But when we're talking about a budget-conscious wedding business or photography business model, we also have to think about the cost expenses involved. So leveraging tools like this that don't cost us a whole lot to be able to give us a head start, I think are important. So definitely recommend those. Again, I'm not the professional. I mentioned professionals earlier, so I'll certainly recommend that anybody listening in or watching go to Fusa or Julia or Corey and Dylan if you want some more professional recommendations there. But just wanted to throw out a few key pointers. Anything on SEO or the website that you wanted to kind of add on before we keep going, Alex?
No, I mean, that sort of sounds really useful information. I mean, the SEO thing I know is really important, but I really don't understand it. You know, I just don't. It's sort of just like, even when I listen, I think I've listened to a couple of those podcasts, and even when I listen to them, it just sort of goes over my head. You know what I mean? It's just like, what are they talking? You know, it's just sort of like speaking a different language, really. But yeah, that Yoast thing sounds useful, because that's the problem. It's sort of like, I don't even know what an H1, you know, what the different tags are. And I just don't really I know they're there, but I don't understand how they work.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a good place to start. And they've got quite a few resources on their site too. They have a blog, so you can reference those as well. Okay, well, we're going to keep going. And I know that for everybody listening in, we're kind of just scratching the surface on each of these topics, but we're going to keep the conversation going. Let's jump to marketing. And let me start, Alex, and I should have done this before as well. Do you have any kind of questions, specific questions to lead the conversation about marketing?
I assumed it was going to be mainly based around the website, so then based on SEO. But I'm always open to ideas about how to market. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I'm not going to be. I probably won't be back in the UK. I've just received an offer on my house here, so I'm probably not going to be back in the UK till early autumn. So it's probably going to be heading into the end of the wedding season rather than the beginning.
Okay.
But
So you've got a little bit of time. Yeah.
yeah,
The thing about SEO, it's extremely powerful, but as you also pointed out, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of people on there. Now you type in, Newbury wedding photographer, and you're going to get a ton of results. So it's going to take a little bit to get up to a place where you're competitive in the first page or two. So relying on that exclusively for exposure and then ultimately being able to book clients is going to be a tough thing to do initially. My suggestion, outside of those kind of brief suggestions I made for the website, clear brand position, making sure that you're beginning to develop an SEO strategy, using Yoast and potentially the help of some others, is to start thinking a little bit about, well, first of all, let's talk about bridal shows. Are bridal shows as common in the UK at the moment?
I think I remember being sent a photograph one many years ago for the newspaper, so I know they exist.
Okay.
I think it's one of those things. It's a bit like, unless you're getting married, you don't know anything about them.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, the only reason I ask again is because of,
exist.
Okay. I know that when I was shooting actively, and I'm not as familiar at the moment, but when I was shooting actively, there were, if you charge, as we started to raise our prices, we were getting to a place where maybe it's 3 to 5 and then higher than that. It didn't really make sense to go there anymore because it seemed that the traffic that it attracted, at least at the local bridal show, may have been different in some others, but the local bridal show, we weren't talking about the high-end bride. And so they were going to be attracted to the prices at the low end. And we had pretty great success. I think coming off of one bridal show, we booked, I want to say like 13 weddings off of just one show. We may have spent $1,000 to have a booth there, something in that ballpark. But we booked something like 13 weddings. It was a really successful venture, but we did that at a time when we were charging a relatively low price point. So that's my personal experience. I don't want to make suggestions just based on an individual experience, but I do know from personal experience that tended to be the case in our market, where that price point that you're talking about charging may actually garner you quite a bit of attention and opportunity to be able to book a client. So you may at least look into that. And based on the cost and the potential opportunity there, looking at some of the competition that's going to be there, make some decisions about that. Wedding, I think I alluded to this earlier briefly, but wedding coordinators are not going to be as, appealing a resource for business when we're talking about this price point of, let's say, £1,200 or so, because brides or grooms who are hiring a photographer at that price point likely don't have the budget to hire a coordinator. Maybe a friend or family member in that case, and not necessarily a professional. And so we're not looking to coordinators for referrals and for business as much as a $5,000 or maybe even a $3,000 photographer would. So where I tend to still go here at this price point is a few things. One, or two things really. Google's ad platform the most recent version is called Google Performance Max. And this is not a platform that I can speak about from kind of an expertise standpoint or an expert standpoint. It's something that we're actually beginning to tap into ourselves, but there would be an opportunity at, I think, a relatively low price point to be able to start to get some attention, some traction. When people are searching Newbury wedding photographer, you may not pop up organically, but you might start popping up through an ad and be able to get their attention. It's sitting at the top of the page anyway. Might be able to start to get some attention to your site once it's actually set up. Might be able to start to get some attention that would drive some inquiries and some business that way. So Google Performance Max, spend a little bit of time kind of starting to dig into that. Unfortunately, it's a platform that does not have a lot of resources out there yet on the education side. We're having to kind of, I guess, just work our way into it by, Googling and playing and experimenting. But you can't go to 50 different websites for a course on how to actually get it started. So a little bit of a process. But the reason I recommend it is because it is, unless something changes, it is going to be what Facebook used to be, say, 3 or 4 years ago. In that you're able to target the potential client more effectively, more specifically, based on certain parameters you can do that way better than what you can now with Facebook. Facebook made a lot of changes to, with privacy, and totally understandable, but it just is what it is. You're much more limited now with Facebook. Google Performance Max, you have some really incredible abilities to be able to get really specific about who you want to see those ads. And especially at the price point that you're at, I think that's going to be a really powerful potential tool. So that would be the first one. I realize this all amounts to a little bit of investment up front. Maybe a few $100 here and there, getting some ads running, maybe a little bit more over time, the first year in particular, spending some money doing these things. But I think this will help get your business off the ground. So that's one. And then I still would suggest Facebook. And one of the things that we've found, there's quite a bit of benefit, and the price point is quite manageable in running traffic ads. And this is getting a little bit technical, but Facebook, on a very simple level, you can run traffic ads to get people to your site, and then you can kind of retarget those same people that came to your site and run conversion ads, and hopefully actually book some clients through that. Those conversion ads now are not as effective because of the changes that Facebook have made, and so running traffic ads for the sake of exposure, what'll drive people to your site, is a relatively inexpensive way to get eyes on your brand, and potentially a way to convert. Now you can follow that up with retargeting efforts, but I would still at least experiment with Facebook. And experiment is the key here. There are plenty of resources about Facebook ads, but part of it does come down to your brand specifically and how you're running your brand and what you're trying to accomplish, and a little bit of experimentation with both the targeting as well as the calls to action, the type of images that you're using. You can kind of experiment with what converts the best. I would still recommend Facebook and Instagram. Again, limited in its ability to be able to target super, super specifically, but a relatively low cost way to get exposure to your brand. So honestly, those are my two recommendations. And it may seem simplistic, but when it comes to this particular market segment, I know I can speak to at least the US market. The ads that I see running on Facebook or on Instagram, they are, I think, very much fitting to the demographic that you're trying to reach, and probably where there's quite a bit of success. There's still opportunity for success. So I'd go there, and I'd go to Google Performance Max and start with that. Now, networking, I still have to add this on because there's still opportunity, and it sounds like it's more commonplace as you were describing it, as I saw in my research, that is more commonplace for photography to be offered at, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 in that marketplace, even more so than we're seeing here in the US. And so there may still be opportunities to network with vendors, local business events, wedding vendor business events, networking events, and that's something that we found some success in. So I would go ahead and throw that out there because I think you can't ever just get rid of the potential for some of these, what can be really important pieces of the puzzle. But where I'd kind of that 80-20 principle, where I'd really focus my attention and effort, would be Performance Max and then Facebook ads as well.
Yeah, I mean, we don't seem to have wedding coordinators as much in the UK. I mean, they seem to be a really big thing in the US. But
interesting.
In the UK,
Okay.
I mean, it's just from what I've researched, when you put it in, do a Google on it for the UK, you don't get a lot of people. Can you give me a second? I'm just running out of money on my phone.
Oh, sure.
It's okay. So I'm having to do this all over the phone.
No worries at all. Yeah. So for everybody listening in, I know that we've kind of touched on a lot of, while Alex is setting up his phone there, I know we've touched on a lot of different talking points here, and we're really just kind of barely scratching the surface. All of these topics we've covered in more detail on individual podcast episodes, and I've had, of course, experts coming in and speaking to these various talking points. If you just go to bokehpodcast.com, and I'll pull this up here for everyone listening in so you can actually see this, because I don't think we highlight this enough. It's such a great resource. Go to bokehpodcast.com, and you can see there at the very top of the page, right underneath our position statement, welcome to Bokeh, the photography podcast that helps photographers build sustainable businesses. Right underneath that, the search episodes bar, you can search for specific episodes, or you can just search a topic. Search that topic there, and whether it's SEO or Facebook or Pinterest, going on and searching for these various topics and actually getting detailed breakdown on those topics from experts. I'm just kind of scratching the surface here. That is going to be really important. So make sure that you take advantage of that tool there. All right, Alex, are we good to go? I think we lost Alex. Okay, so we're gonna keep going here. And the other thing that I'll throw out there for everybody, I know that oh, we got Alex calling back in. Hold on one second here. All right, we got the guest in the green room. There he is. We got you, Alex.
So you used up all my credit on the phone.
No worries, no worries. Okay.
One of the disadvantages of being in Nairobi.
Oh, okay. So you're actually based in Nairobi at the moment.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I'm here. I'm literally, like I said, that's yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Nairobi.
Yeah, I can have never been before. Yeah, I can imagine there's some of those challenges for sure. Okay, well, I want to, as we're finishing up here, I know that we've just barely scratched the surface on each of these topics. Brand position, we talked about pricing and services, website, SEO, marketing. Again, I know that the approach is simplistic, but by the way, what I'm also suggesting to you, Alex, here, and for the record, for everybody listening in, is also kind of the approach that I would take at this point. I had in mind, and I may still do it at some point, an idea to kind of prove a concept and start a comparable business model here in the Chattanooga area. And literally, it's affordable wedding photography for Chattanooga couples was the position statement that I would planned on using, because I think there's an opportunity. Say that again.
I've seen your website.
Oh, you have? Okay, so yeah. So there is actually a site live, just a very, very simple website that's live, and I may still pursue that, but the recommendations and suggestions that I'm making are kind of how I would approach this as well. And if you have more detailed questions, of course, feel free to ask those. But let me just touch really quickly on the workflow piece, because this is, as nerdy as this might even seem to some, the reality is that if we're going to run a business model that is charging low prices, we need to maximize the value of our time, the way that we're using our time to maximize the profit, right? So that means efficiency is key. You already mentioned PickTime, and how PickTime, of course, we talked about, it's not just a gallery, but it does your marketing for you. So already you're leveraging a tool that is really powerful in that sense. CRM is really important for the sake of automating a lot of the interaction with the client. And I think one of the issues that you had run into, you said, was with scheduling. Is that right?
Well, I just had this idea that I wanted, a lot of these CRMs will have a form you have up on your website. And the client's meant to fill out the form, and then it comes to the CRM, and then you contact the client. And I was hoping there'd be a way of automating the form, so when it came to you, it has the date of their wedding on it. So if you're already booked for the wedding, you would just have to send an automatic email back to them saying, sorry, I'm not available. And if you're free for that date, you could send an automatic email saying, that's great, I can do your wedding. Here's a calendar. Calendly.
Mm-hmm.
So they can book a time to have a meeting with you. But all the CRMs I've contacted said, oh no, we can't do that.
I think that the way that most of these, unless I'm misunderstanding it, I think the way that most of these CRMs have designed the process is, rather than this kind of back and forth with email, you simply make your availability known through their calendar system. Very similar actually to the way that Calendly does. So if I just wanted to keep it simple and use Calendly and not worry about a full CRM, I would simply choose which dates I wanted to make available in my calendar. I could block them off in my Google Calendar. Calendly would see that. And it would only allow for the Saturdays. Let's say I only want to shoot weddings on Saturdays. For the Saturdays that I am not busy, I can mark on my Google Calendar that I'm busy. Calendly sees that, and it removes that from the calendar. If I'm not marked busy, then the client would be able to choose that particular date and go ahead and book it. And then would ensue that kind of back and forth of the email that you were talking about. I think the way that Honeybook, and I actually pulled up a number of them here. Let me share my screen real quick for everybody listening in. So there was actually an article, if somebody wants just kind of a summary of CRMs. Bloom, which is also a CRM, wrote an article summing this up. If you go to blog.bloom.io and summed up kind of the list of existing CRMs. But Dubsado, they have a scheduling booking process that they have available there on through their CRM. We've got Shootproof here, which owns Tave, and it looks like they've got a scheduling system built in as well. Sprout Studio, they have a process there for booking clients as well. So a calendar, you can choose a date, and of course you would designate availability. Pixify is another one that has appointment scheduling. 17 Hats, another really powerful platform. And I don't know if I saw specifically the booking feature there on their site, but as well as I know their owner and as comprehensive a platform that is, it's likely built in. Honeybook, I think you had mentioned Honeybook. They actually have a feature very much like Calendly built in that allows you to schedule meetings, and you could do something like this that it would be comparable for weddings. So, for let's say you want to shoot weddings on Saturdays, you can make your availability known for an all-day event or an 8-hour event on Saturdays, and do the same thing.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the problem is quite a lot of the CRMs don't only work within the US and Canada.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I got in touch with Honeybook, and they're just like, we only work in the US and Canada.
Really? That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Does Calendly work in the UK?
Yeah, Calendly does. And the one, Studio Ninja, seems very international.
Okay.
I think it's partly to do with the payment schedules. They don't have it set up to do international payments. So it's sort of like, quite a few of them won't. I know, Honeybook were just like, we don't. Didn't even really answer the. Yeah. That's
surprising. Well, again, I would just, for anybody listening or watching, and Alex, for you as well, I mean, I think there's, if you just go to, and I've got it here up on screen, but it's called 15 Best CRMs for Photographers, 2022 edition. You can Google that, anybody listening in. We can link to it in the show notes as well. And there's a pretty comprehensive list there, and check and see. I would assume this day and age that any company who's online is going to make their services available internationally as well. It seems a little bit backwards not to, but maybe that's not the case. But yeah, there are plenty of platforms available that will help simplify that scheduling process. They're not necessarily the email workflow that you talked about, but where somebody literally can see your availability, book it, and then you would get an automated email saying somebody booked it based on your availability. So that's how that would work. What do you, and then, so that's the CRM portion, but what do you do for email and calendar? Are you just using the Google Suite for that?
Yeah, at the moment, to be honest, at the moment I have so few appointments, I don't really have to do those.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it'll be setting up. I mean, Calendly, which I found out through your podcast, I can see how, because it just makes life so much easier rather than, we've all had that where you're phoning somebody up or trying to make an appointment to photograph somebody, and it's sort of like, I can do Tuesday, it's just like, even when you're just doing it by the phone, it's a pain.
Yeah.
I can do, makes life a lot simpler.
And, well, I think if nothing else, you could start with Calendly, and then if there's not, it just seems so weird to me that a CRM wouldn't make their services available overseas, but then you could find a CRM that might have that option available for you, because ultimately, again, we want to consolidate. I think one of the things that helps with efficiency a lot when it comes to workflow is consolidating tools that we use for that workflow. A lot of photographers get excited about all these tools, whether it's their shooting workflow with all their gear or their actual workflow in their office workflow. All these plugins and pieces of software and hardware and so forth, and it just unnecessarily complicates the workflow. If you have a gallery system like PicTime, you have a CRM, whatever that ends up being, and then you've got simple Gmail and Google Calendar, which, by the way, is available to you any and everywhere, right? You can even log into from somebody else's computer. I love the flexibility of that. Of course, you have access to it on your phone as well. I want something that's light and simple and efficient that I can take with me anywhere. And so I've been using the Google Suite for quite some time for its flexibility and its speed as well. And I would recommend that. I know you mentioned editing as well as part of it, because that's really the only remaining part of the actual workflow. I think photographers, again, kind of overcomplicate what they have to do in a week. It's not that complicated, really. What about editing? Do you do that on your own? Have you kind of experimented with outsourcing it?
I mean, obviously, I've partly from your podcast listening. I mean, I never even realized there was outsourcing of editing, to be honest, till recently. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's obviously that, but certainly to start off with, I'm probably going to have to handle it myself. But it's like you said, I mean, it's sitting down and doing it in a way. I mean, I was interested, like, I mean, you've mentioned in the past how some photographers will spend like half an hour trying to decide between 10 photos of the same thing.
Right.
And to be honest, once you're down to that 10, you only have to pick one. You know what I mean? It's not like, so, I mean, the thing which I do find a bit weird about wedding photography is this emphasis on the number of shots photos you're going to supply of a wedding. I supply 500 shots. I supply 600 shots. I mean, 500 shots is a lot of photos.
It is.
I mean, I saw somebody say today, it was one of the ones I looked at today when I was going through for that spreadsheet. One of the people was saying they supplied like 1,200 shots. And I'm just thinking, that's a lot of photos for anyone to look through.
And but see, the thing is, I don't think photographers think about that. Again, they're thinking about themselves and how they see it. And that's not discussed enough. You're absolutely right. 1,000 pictures, I would venture that a client, maybe with one except, maybe the first time they look at the pictures, they're going to actually go through all those images. But when are they going to look at 1,200 pictures? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think, Alex, with the business model that you're talking about, offering 300 or 400 images for, say, an 8-hour day is more than enough, especially if they're high quality images. That's the other thing. Photographers are just shooting everything, any and everything, and then the quality suffers because you're not going to deliver 1,200 stunning images. It's going to be maybe 200 stunning images, and then the rest are kind of go down from there.
And also, it depends on the wedding. Sorry.
No, please.
It depends on the wedding.
Yeah.
It depends on the wedding. If you've got a wedding of 50 people, you're going to get less pictures than if you've got a wedding of 200 people. Just by not,
Sure.
You're not going to have I find it just sort of a weird thing. It's a bit like camera manufacturers always going on about megapixels. It's just like, just because you have more megapixels doesn't necessarily make it a better camera. And it's just the same sort of, and also it's sort of like somebody going, if you book me for 6 hours, I'll give you 400 pictures. If you book me for 8 hours, they magically find another 300 photos, and you're going, it doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But
sure. Well, I think it's important that you highlight that, because when we're talking about the idea of outsourcing editing, but you're charging $1,200 to for the wedding, you have minimal cash to play with, but if all you're delivering is a USB stick, and let's say maybe let's consider it about $10 cost for the gallery, the hosting of the gallery at peak time, and there may be a few other kind of random costs here and there, but the biggest cost is going to be the USB drive. Then the only additional cost would be the editing. And if you're delivering, let's say 300 images, or even 400 images at roughly 25 cents a piece, you're talking about $100, right? So it's in the scheme of things, you're talking about 10% or so of your gross margin, but it's going to then potentially save you hours on end. If you can edit that in an hour, it may be better for you to do it yourself. Most photographers can't. They're spending, 8, 10, 12 hours, 16, 20 hours editing, post-producing the images after a wedding, and that's eating up way too much time. That 20-hour workflow or a 20-hour-a-week workflow can be had by outsourcing that, one of the most time-consuming elements of the business. So let's say you call the images that you shot down to 400 images that you're going to deliver to your client. You send those to photographers edit. It's $100, or 300 images, roughly $75 to get those images edited based on your style, your preferences that you share. And you still have quite a bit of margin left over.
You're right. I mean, you're definitely right in that kind of scenario. If you've got sort of weeks of weddings booked up for every Saturday, it's going to make a lot of sense to take some of that workload away.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I culling the images, I'd find that a bit difficult to hand over, because I always feel like they don't actually know what happened during the day. So you might have reshot something later in the day. So you don't want you sort of know for some reason the first lot of pictures weren't the right ones, and you know what I mean. You don't exactly know how it all panned out.
Yeah, I get the
Yeah.
concern. Where our team, and we've been processing images now for 14 years, millions and millions and millions of images,
Yeah.
and our kind of most experienced editors have looked at so many images and know the patterns and know what to look for. And what photographers who do have us do the culling, what they can do is they'll actually note, hey, look for this particular thing, or keep this in mind, or these additional images, make sure you keep those. And they'll just make that note, and that kind of handles that concern that something might be missed. Because the reality is most weddings, the way that most weddings play out, that pattern is pretty easily recognizable when we process as many images as we do. So it's not too much of a challenge. I would say probably 70%, 75% or so of our clients do their own culling and send us the rest. But there's certainly quite a number of them that have, in fact, actually an increasing number that have had us do their culling. So the option definitely exists there. Any questions though? Again, we kind of just scratched the surface. Any specific questions about workflow that I may not have answered that we can get into before we finish up?
Photographic workflow or the picture workflow?
On the actual day of the wedding?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm not. I mean, I've done it. Like I said, I've done a few. I do. I mean, I find it quite useful because, like I said, I've been doing a lot of research about weddings and looking at people's. I mean, there are some things I just hadn't ever come across until I started looking at other people's wedding photography.
Sure.
I mean, I was like a bit amazed when I started seeing like the bride and her bridesmaids all wearing the same dressing gowns and stuff. I've never come across.
Sure.
And things like, I've never seen that in my life before. So at least now I sort of know that goes on. It's sort of like, I've hardly, sort of, there's sort of some weirdness around what people do at weddings. It's sort of like strange things. It's like I said to you before, if you're not getting married, you don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely, you're going to see a wide range of things out there for sure. But when it comes to the actual, you said the picture workflow. So you're talking about after you shoot the wedding?
Yeah, editing. I mean, I'm not particularly, I mean, I've done big editing down work isn't, as long as I know I've got to do it, I can do it. That's why in some ways I prefer to be quite busy, because if I know there's another wedding coming, I have to get on with it.
Right.
Whereas if you go, oh, that next wedding's in 6 weeks' time, I can tell you I'll be just sat there for like a week not doing anything. But that's just human nature.
Yeah. So, I mean, workflow, there's so many different areas of the workflow that we can talk about. Do you mean the actual process of editing the images, the approach to that?
Oh, no, I'm not really worried about it. I mean, I'm sort of used to doing editing. It's something I've been doing it for, God, like I say, since basically my last 20 years.
Sure.
Knocking, I mean, whole thing of putting them through Photo Mechanic and then putting them through Lightroom.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see the benefit of outsourcing it as well, if you can afford to do that.
And that's, yeah, I mean, when it comes to workflow, it is certainly probably one of the most the biggest time savings. The actual, I think the thing that helped myself and my business partner when we were shooting weddings was having a workflow down so that we knew how we would shoot an event, which translated to, I mean, some photographers will say, well, I don't know how many images I'm going to get back from an event. It could be this many, it could be this many, I don't know. But there was a certain intention in the way that we photographed, which then, to your point, Alex, kind of led to a place where we didn't have to overshoot. We came back with a certain number of images pretty consistently. And then from that, we knew that we were going to deliver roughly 30%. So it was very easy to do the math and the planning. And in the case of then being able to outsource that, it makes it so much easier as well. We offer a service at Photographer's Edit that is an even faster turnaround time. In order to do that, you have to schedule the event in advance. And you say, I'm going to send you this many images on this particular day. And a lot of photographers have a hard time with that because they're like, how can I tell you how many images I'm going to send you? I don't know. I'm just going to go shoot the wedding. And I think that lacks kind of an intention and a strategy. And I think if you go into shooting an event with an intention, with a strategy, and being more particular about the images that you are photographing, it helps minimize overshooting. And if you come up with a consistent workflow, it also helps in the consistency in the finished product as well. So That's just a little extra tidbit, but otherwise, yeah, that'll save you a good bit of time. And the cool thing is, if you outsource that piece of it, and this is something a lot of photographers miss, they think about the upfront cost. They don't think about what they could do with that time that would actually be more valuable, literally. What you could be doing with that time, whether it's an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever it is taking that and allocating that time and effort and energy to running those ads, the Google Max, Performance Max ads, the Facebook and Instagram ads. Probably initially just investing in time in that learning curve, understanding the platforms, learning how to use them, and then beginning to design the ads, right? To write the ads, to come up with the images. And Google Performance Max actually will do a lot of that work for you. You feed it some information, and it kind of the AI does a lot of the work for you. But at the very least, putting time into learning how that platform works, and then for Facebook and Instagram, learning how to write copy and what images work best. Investing the time in that, which is going to translate to revenue, versus sitting in front of your computer and editing those images yourself. Let us do that work so you can do the stuff that will actually generate more revenue. That's the goal, and that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I agree.
It's good food for thought. There's no pressure I'm not meant to pressure you into a sales pitch here.
I understand. I mean, the thing is, also sort of like, because I've got all this time on my hands, because I'm sort of sat here in Nairobi, not able to do anything, it means I can put a lot of research into things. And from a lot of your previous speakers, it seems like they get into this crisis situation because, they start off quite, maybe just as not a fun thing, it's sort of, I'm going to give it a go, and they start doing, and then suddenly one day they realize they've got 30 weddings booked up, and they're totally snowed under. And so I'm trying to set things up with the plan of things getting busy from a quiet start, as opposed to trying to set up stuff when I'm busy.
That's super smart. If you have that opportunity, that lead time, as you're getting ready to move back and you go into the market and you can just go all in, I think that's brilliant. Because here's the thing. You do have competition. We'll kind of finish up with this. You do have competition in that you have photographers in that market that are shooting in that price range, somewhere close by anyway. So you're not coming in unique with the price point. You're coming in, though, unique with your brand position. And you have an opportunity, if you're willing to make an investment up front, to essentially canvas that marketplace with those ads. And then potentially, and when it comes to the network piece of it, because I don't know that local market specifically, I don't know what the wedding scene looks like there and how many network events there might be, and vendors that you might be able to collaborate with who work with clients in that price point. There may still be opportunities there, but at the very least, if you go in, lead with that brand position, a really strong site that represents this brand position, and then you've got ads that you run galore on Google and on Facebook, and canvas that marketplace, especially going into how soon are you moving back?
As long as this sale of the house doesn't fall apart, within about 3 months.
Okay, so you may have a little bit of the wedding season left. So this may be like really kind of planning for the upcoming year, 2023 season.
It will be, yeah.
Yeah, so you actually have a really nice bit of time then to do both the research work that you need to on those ad platforms and learning that, developing some familiarity with it, and then get ready to just go all in. Because, and this is what I was getting to, if you do that, if you prepare and you go in with a really great strategy, and then you just canvas that marketplace with that message and that messaging, I think there's going to be a really interesting opportunity to be able to book very, very quickly at that price point. It's going to be such an appealing price point. And if somebody sees an ad fed to them, which is, wedding photography starting at $9.99, it's going to be like, oh yeah, I'm in, right? So there's opportunity to be able to pick up a large percentage of that market and very, very quickly. And you should be ready. So I think it's great that you're planning in advance so that when you're ready to go live with it, you can just focus on showing up and shooting those weddings. I think it's going to be great.
Fingers crossed.
That's right. Well, and I know again that we just very, very much scratched the surface. So don't be shy after our conversation today to shoot me a DM. If you have more specific individual questions, I just kind of gave some really basic touch points here with each of these topics, but useful. Okay, good. Well, I hope so. And for those of you listening in, same thing. I know that we just scratched the surface, but as I recommended earlier, don't hesitate to go to bokehpodcast.com and search these topics. I know I mentioned some specific episodes, but search these topics. There's well over 500 episodes of content there. And we pretty much touch on all of these topics at one point or another in more detail and with experts. So I'll leave it at that, Alex. I really appreciate you making time to come on and have this conversation today and let others kind of join in and listen in as well.
Well, I hope people found it useful. I found it very useful.
I'm glad. I'm glad to hear it. Everybody, make sure that you go to bokehpodcast.com. We'll have the show notes for the episode posted there once the audio version of this goes out. And for those of you listening to the audio version, come join us sometime for the live version at youtube.com/bokehpodcast and facebook.com/bokehpodcast. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.